And we start with a Fox News alert. It is a big day in Washington, could you say? Big changes coming to major policies. President Trump expected to announce a new strategy on the nuclear Iran deal this afternoon. Hello, I'm John Scott.
Happy Friday. I'm Melissa Francis. The president also levels a major blow to Obamacare. With his health care executive order yesterday, Mr. Trump now saying that subsidies to insurance companies participating in the program will be cut off. And the president says Americans will have more options.
After Obamacare, they were unable to afford their association plan. So they had a great thing, their employees were happy, and then it ended. With this executive order, Americans will likely soon have those options. We will be very happy to provide them to you.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live from the North Lawn on another busy day, John.
Melissa, good morning to you. The president ending the news week with a bang. He has long been an opponent of the so-called cost-sharing reductions in Obamacare. And last evening, the White House announced that the president would end the $7 billion in subsidies to health insurance companies under the Obamacare health exchanges. The president saying at the Values Voters Summit just a short time ago that it is his intention, with the lack of congressional action, to dismantle Obamacare bit by bit. Listen here.
We're taking a little different route than we had hoped because getting Congress, they forgot what their pledges were. So we're going a little different route. But you know what? In the end, it's going to be just as effective, and maybe it'll even be better.
The Democrats are up in arms over the elimination of the subsidies and an executive order that the president signed yesterday that you were talking about to allow more Americans to buy health insurance across state lines and buy short-term health insurance. In a joint statement, Senator Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Minority Leader in the House, Nancy Pelosi, saying, quote, "It is a spiteful act of vast, pointless sabotage leveled at working families and the middle class in every corner of America. Make no mistake about it. Trump will try to blame the Affordable Care Act, but this will fall on his back, and he will pay the price for it." The biggest news coming, though, at 12:45 this afternoon, when the president gives his speech on Iran. The president will announce that he is not going to recertify the Iran nuclear deal under a law called INARA, that stands for the Iranian Nuclear Agreement Review Act, which requires recertification of the Iran nuclear deal every 90 days. That does not take us out of the so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It leaves that intact. But what it does is it kicks the Iran deal over to Congress, and the president is going to urge Congress to enact tough new controls on Iran that go well beyond the nuclear deal, the violation of any one of which could trigger the reimposition of sanctions. Now, Congress basically has three options on Iran. They could follow the president's lead, as he will lay it out today. They could choose to just unilaterally reimpose sanctions against Iran, which nobody expects they would do, or they could do nothing, which I'm told by many members of Congress is the preferred course of action. Any way it works out in Congress, though, Melissa, President Trump has satisfied his base now. He said during the campaign and when he was president that he was going to do something about the Iran nuclear deal. This afternoon, he will do it, and then it's up to Congress to decide what it wants to do. But that's the way it's laid out, so the president can say to his base, I did what I said I was going to do. Melissa?
John, let me just tweezer out one little piece of what you said there. Doing nothing is the preferred course of action in Congress. Truer words never spoken, my friend.
Yeah, well, I mean,
you could just slap that label on everything.
A lot of people say you could broadly apply that to Congress.
Exactly.
But in this particular case, doing nothing leaves the Iran deal intact. I'm not sure exactly legally what it does about INARA. We'll have to look that up. But yeah, you're right. A lot of people might broadly apply that phrase to
Yeah, they
to
love
Congress.
that. John, thank you.
Thank you.
The president says his executive order is a win-win for millions of Americans.
With this executive order, Americans will likely soon have those options. We will be very happy to provide them to you. My administration will explore how we can expand something called short-term, limited duration insurance. These health insurance policies are not subject to any very expansive and expensive Obamacare coverage mandates and rules. The cost of the Obamacare has been so outrageous, it is absolutely destroying everything in its wake.
House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi releasing a statement. Quote, thanks to President Trump's executive sabotage, the millions of Americans with pre-existing conditions could lose access to the affordable health coverage they and their families rely on. Joining us now, Jerry Seib, the executive Washington editor of the Wall Street Journal. So the political lines are pretty firmly drawn already. The president thinks voters are going to blame Democrats. Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats seem to think voters are going to blame the president. Where does it lie?
Well, I think that is the question, politically at least, that's going to frame the debate for a while now. You know, the Democrats have been saying for a while that if the Obama administration moves in and tries to undermine Obamacare, Obamacare ceases to be the Democrats' problem and it becomes the Republicans' problem, and specifically President Trump's problem. And, you know, we at the Journal did an interview with the president back in the spring, and I asked him this question. You know, I said, if the law goes south once you're president, you tend to own responsibility for things. Won't that be the case? And he said then, well, not for now, because it's still the Democrats' law, but eventually it'll be my problem. Well, I think the question is whether we've reached eventually or not. Democrats are counting on the president is now having to take the blame for anything that happens to individual consumers that they don't like. The Trump administration clearly believes Obamacare is still called Obamacare. It's still the Democrats' problem if it's not working right.
But doesn't the Supreme Court back him on the question as to whether or not the White House can unilaterally repay these insurance companies?
Right. Yeah, that question has been up in the air for months now, the question of whether the administration can take it upon itself, any administration can take it upon itself to simply choose to pay subsidies to insurance companies to provide policies under Obamacare. But the political question is whether the people who sit behind where I am now in Congress are going to fix that problem by proposing and then passing legislation that authorizes those payments. That could still happen, by the way. Some Republicans think that may be the way to go. You eliminate the legal question, and therefore it becomes a budget question, not a legal question, and we'll see if that happens. It's not very clear from what the president is saying whether he thinks that would be a good idea or not.
But clearly with tweets like that from Nancy Pelosi, the Democrats will do everything they can to pin this on the president and the Republicans, and I guess the question is to see whether that blame sticks.
Well, that's true. That is a big question. There's also a kind of a logical disconnect in what the president is saying. He is saying, as he did several times yesterday, these steps I'm going to take are going to make the situation much better. We're going to fix the problem step by step using executive orders. But at the same time, he reaches out to Democrats and says, this is a big mess. You ought to come to me and let's work together to fix it. So it's not very clear whether he thinks he's moving out on his own forevermore or whether this is an attempt to create a situation which Democrats think it's in their interest to come back to him and try to once again come up with a bipartisan fix.
Yeah, here's that tweet that he put out in the pre-dawn hours this morning. He writes, the Democrats' Obamacare is imploding. Massive subsidy payments to their pet insurance companies has stopped. Dems should call me to fix. So it sounds as though he's open to negotiation. The question is whether the other party will answer the call.
Right, and whether they think politically they need to or not. I mean, clearly the Democratic suspicion here is that these are steps designed specifically to undermine and bring about the further collapse of Obamacare, thereby compelling Democrats to come and negotiate a deal with President Trump more to the Republicans' liking. Whether that works or not remains to be seen. It's kind of basically a standoff at this point. How bad will things get and who's going to take the blame when they get worse?
And the only way, I guess, that voters can express that is at the ballot box. So we're talking about November 2018, right?
Right, although I have to say a cautionary footnote is there are some people in Congress from both parties, moderate senators from both parties, led by Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, who have been actually talking with each other for several weeks, if not a couple of months now, about steps that could be taken to try to fix the insurance market under Obamacare in a bipartisan way, to fix the problem, not to simply let it get worse. That still could take on a life of its own right now. Again, not clear whether President Trump is interested in that or not, but that may happen whether he leads that charge or not.
So let's say that, you know, millions of insurance policies get canceled en masse now as a result of this. Are people going to be really blaming the political leaders, or are they going to be blaming their insurance companies?
Well, you know, probably both, I would guess. And, you know, one of the things we've seen in the last few years is when those sorts of things start to happen, you know, politicians are receptive. They're responsive to to public outrage, and you may have public outrage here. What that response is remains to be seen, but it is not necessarily the case that we have a static situation here. This could change fairly rapidly for months to come, and maybe it does lead to some kind of a bipartisan solution down the road. But between here and there, there's every reason to think it's going to be messy.
Jerry Seib, the Washington editor at the Wall Street Journal. You're going to have your hands full in the coming months.
As usual, yeah.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks.
Crews gaining ground on the catastrophic California wildfires, but the number of dead rising as well. A live report from wine country. Plus, we're awaiting a major announcement from the White House on whether President Trump will recertify the Iran nuclear deal, how that would pass the buck to Congress.
As flawed as the deal is, I believe we must now enforce the hell out of it.
President Trump set to make a big foreign policy announcement with the White House from the White House this afternoon, unveiling the U.S. strategy moving forward on Iran. All signs point to the president declining to recertify that landmark nuclear deal. Here he is talking to Sean Hannity.
It's a very bad deal. I'm not saying anything different tonight that I have been saying for 2 years. Yeah. It's a horrible, horrible embarrassment to our country. And we did it out of weakness when actually we had great strength.
Joining us now for more on this topic, Jonathan Schanzer. He's Vice President of Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. We also have Christopher Swift. He is Georgetown University National Security Studies Professor and National Securities Attorney. Thanks to both of you, gentlemen, for coming. Jonathan, let me start with you. Do you think it's a good idea to not recertify? What happens next?
Well, I think we need to distinguish between decertifying and walking away from the deal.
Okay.
What the president is doing is he's kicking this to Congress. He's saying that he no longer sees this deal, or that he doesn't see this deal, as being in the national interest of the United States. He has questions about enforcement. He has questions about Iran's regional activities, its ballistic missile activities, and he's asking not only Congress, but the international community, the nuclear deal negotiators, to go back and look at ways to fix this. He's thrusting all of this into a period of uncertainty, of instability, but he is not walking away from the deal. So he's trying to get people to fix the problems that I think many of us have long seen in this deal.
Christopher, one of the biggest problems is that when President Obama was walking around selling this, and we all remember the phrase, he said there would be anytime, anywhere inspections, and there would be snapback sanctions. There certainly hasn't been a single inspection, much less anywhere, anytime inspections.
Well, there are certainly some deficiencies on the inspection side, Melissa.
Some deficiencies, they don't happen.
Well, Melissa, the other piece is that the snapback sanctions haven't snapped back yet because
there's no inspections.
Because there's no verification that Iran has abrogated the deal. Look, Melissa, I agree with Jonathan that this indicates the president is not happy with the deal and is consulting with Congress and wants Congress to take more of a leadership role here. I also agree that we need to distinguish between decertification in this instance and blowing up the entire nuclear accord. The question I have for the administration is, if you have a problem, why do we think we can solve it by making it bigger? This period of uncertainty that Jonathan correctly identifies makes it difficult for our allies
I got to stop you right there, because you're saying there's been no evidence. I mean, first of all, we haven't been allowed to go in and do any inspections. Second of all, the UN has said that they have an illegal amount of heavy water on hand, more than they agreed to. There's only one thing that you would need that for. Jonathan.
They have more.
Look, we have seen multiple problems, and I think that the nuclear problems may actually just be a small part of it. And I think what we're going to see from the president today, as I understand it, is a broader strategy in looking at Iran's behavior across the region, looking at the way they've deployed the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, looking at the way they're using proxies across the region, of course, looking at the ballistic missile capabilities and the tests. All of these things are cause for significant concern, and this is really what is prompting the president to say that he doesn't see this deal as being in the national interest, that we've provided Iran with more than $100 billion, and look at what they're doing with it. And that's why we're going to go back and look, I think, at the entirety of Iran's behavior, not just the nuclear deal itself. And I think it's the right move. It's what many of the critics were saying from the get-go.
Christopher, it's ridiculous for you to say that there has been no verification that they violated the deal. There's also no verification that they've gone along with the deal because we're not allowed to go in and look at anything.
Well, Melissa, the IAEA has done some inspections. Those inspections, in my view, and in Jonathan's view, I would think as well, are deficient. But I want to get to this broader point that Jonathan made about Iran's bad behavior in other domains. We know that they're supporting the Syrian regime. We know that they're mucking around with the civil war in Yemen. We know that they're still sponsoring terrorism. There are lots of problems with Iran, and we need not just the United States to take a tougher line on that, but our allies to take a tougher line on that. And one of the concerns I have about decertification and the uncertainties that it creates is that by turning up the temperature on the nuclear front, we may be encouraging our allies to take a more reactive approach to U.S. policy on all of the other fronts that Jonathan correctly identified as being national security concerns.
Jonathan, where does, I mean, you know, Christopher brings up our allies. One of our allies is Israel. And where has this whole thing left them?
Well, the Israelis have been irate over the deal itself. They felt very exposed. They felt hung out to dry by the Obama administration. I think they're pleased to see this half measure. I think you actually even see people in Israel who are saying, don't destroy the deal, fix the deal. And actually even Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, said fix it, you know, not nix it, right? At a certain point, you might have to nix the deal, but he wants to fix the deal. This is what the president is now asking everyone to do. And I think you have the Israelis, the Arab countries as well are all very pleased with this. It's the Europeans who are nervous because they've invested so much in the deal itself, and they've invested a lot in Iran financially, as well as the Russians and the Chinese.
They're using it as a market where they can sell their products, and they don't want to lose that come what may in the future. Gentlemen, thanks to both of you. It's a tough problem. Not sure we solved it, but thank you.
Good to be with you.
Yeah.
Remember Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl? Well, he's expected in a military court next week. How will he plead as his court-martial is set to get underway? And as the media scrambles to cover President Trump's daily tweets, are they missing the bigger picture? Our panel weighs in next.
It's frankly disgusting the way the press is able to write whatever they want to write, and people should look into it.
Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl is set to enter a plea in his court-martial case on Monday. Bergdahl faces court-martial for desertion and misbehavior before the enemy. Army investigators say Bergdahl walked away from his unit's remote outpost in Afghanistan in 2009 and was quickly captured by the Taliban, who then held him prisoner for the next 5 years. President Obama later treated 5 Guantanamo Bay inmates for his release. The Associated Press reports that Bergdahl is expected to plead guilty, but his legal team has made no comment.
Well, President Trump is keeping up his criticism of the media, particularly against what he calls fake news and recent reports about his nuclear weapons policy from NBC News. But is the media itself becoming too wrapped up in the daily back and forth with the president? Wall Street Journal editorial board member Kimberly Strassel writing this: Mr. Trump will keep baiting the media with shiny objects. In the background, government is being redone. So what's she referring to there? Let's talk about it with Hugo Gurdon, the editorial director of the Washington Examiner. David Katniss is the senior politics writer for U.S. News and World Report. I should probably share with viewers the title of that Kimberly Strassel piece. It's called Scalia's All the Way Down. She argues that while the media are obsessing about the president's latest tweets, Hugo, what's really happening is that the president is nominating conservatives for federal judgeships who are going to be reshaping the judicial branch for 40 years or more.
Well, Kim is exactly right on this. What's happening is that, and this is something that that President Trump, and even before he was president, has done a lot, which is to draw attention over here, but do substantive things over here. What he's doing is appointing or nominating textualists, which is to say people who believe, judges who believe that the law is what it says it is and that it should not be interpreted as meaning something else by leftist judges. So while He's drawing attention for tweets on North Korea and on NBC and fake news, etc. He really is reshaping the judiciary, and these people could be on the courts for the next 40 years, which may be about as long as it's needed to undo some of the damage that the left has done to American judiciary.
David, we all know about Justice Neil Gorsuch, the president's so far only nomination to the Supreme Court, but this goes beyond that. This goes to federal judgeships all across the country.
Yeah, many people don't realize that because of what Mitch McConnell did during the Obama years, basically not allowing judges to come through, once President Trump took office, he had 100 vacancies to fill from the Obama years, just starting out on day one. So he has already made a pretty big impact on that, filling these basically week by week, putting out statements on appellate and district court judges down the line, but they haven't gotten a lot of attention, and I think that's why the Strassel column is prescient. Look, from the media perspective, let's be honest about this. It is much easier to cover President Trump's in-the-moment tweets than it is to do a big story or a big deep dive and research on his judicial appointments around the country. And I think that is part of the factor here, too. You know, it takes a lot more resources to go in and do these stories, these deep dives on a judicial, you know, a long-time Supreme Court justice who's been elevated to a federal bench. And I think that's also part of it.
Here's how our media critic, Howard Kurtz, sees it. He writes, "This is the emerging media narrative about Trump, that he's constantly getting mad, that he doesn't know much about foreign policy, and that his generals and advisors have to save him from himself." Hugo Kimberly Strassel points out that, well, Mitch McConnell is helping him grease the wheels for a lot of these federal appointments. He and Mitch McConnell have been, you know, they've battled publicly. The president has criticized him quite often on Twitter, but behind the scenes, McConnell is helping out with this judicial program.
This is one of the extraordinary ironies. You know, Mitch McConnell is now besieged by Steve Bannon and the Bannon wing of the party, who promised to primary all sorts of Republicans who voted for Mitch McConnell to be leader. But as David said, Mitch McConnell was the guy who sat on the appointment or the nomination of Merrick Garland during the final year of the Obama administration. He's the one who has extended the end of the filibuster to Supreme Court nominations, and these judges are now flowing into the judiciary. And, you know, it's a bit like in The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz tells Dorothy, hey, don't look at the guy pulling the levers behind the curtain. President Trump is doing all of these things which attract media attention, and behind the curtain there's a lot of substantive things going on.
And the irony, too, David, is that Harry Reid helped out by, you know, changing the filibuster rule on anything short of a Supreme Court appointment.
Right, and we should point out on the Mitch McConnell effort, he's making a change just this week, getting rid of the Senate blue slip law, which is this arcane law that allows a home state senator to object to a judicial appointment. He's going to get rid of that. So that was sort of the Democrats' last stand to stop these judicial nominees from moving through committee, from getting votes. Now McConnell's going to get rid of that. So that is going to allow for a bunch of more judges to get through. And that's why I think you got the reception that you saw earlier today when President Trump was at the Values Voters Summit. Yeah. Why, you know, he wasn't sort of positioned as a social conservative, but they love him, and the activists love him because he's also allowing them to choose a lot of these judges. These, you know, the judicial committees and the conservative groups, interest groups in Washington are doing the legwork to push these nominees forward, and Mitch McConnell is facilitating that quietly in the Senate. Yeah,
the Trump years in the White House will last 8 years at the very most, but the impact could go on for generations. Fascinating stuff. Hugo, David, thank you both.
Thanks, you.
John.
Democrats pulling no punches and calling President Trump's executive order on health care, quote, sabotage. Who wins this high-stakes political showdown? Our panel debates next. Plus, wildfires still raging in Northern California, and the scope of the disaster is staggering. We're live in the fire zone coming up.
This is a Fox News alert. 31 people are confirmed dead now in the massive wildfires raging in California wine country, and that number could go up because hundreds are still missing. Robert Gray is reporting live from the Napa County Fairgrounds for us right now. Robert?
Hi, John. Thanks so much. We are getting word that firefighters are making progress in containing the fires, but they have brought a lot of devastation and destruction to the wine country area so far. And we're pleased to be joined by CHRİS, and she is the president of the Sonoma County Wine Growers. And CHRİS, thank you for joining us. Rough week for you. You've lost your home. Your vineyard has been threatened by the fires. You've had to evacuate your mother. How are you and others dealing with this?
Yeah, it's absolutely been a surreal week here. But you know what? There's an amazing spirit in Sonoma County, and I know Napa Valley as well. And people are rallying together and making sure everyone's safe and has food and basic supplies. And you know, we're going to get through this, and we're absolutely going to be rebuilding as soon as we can get everyone safe and out of the fire zones.
Now, we've heard a lot of reports about wineries being damaged or destroyed, at least 15 in this area. But you say that the vines should be okay.
Yeah, and in fact, probably the most surprising thing for folks is that the vineyards are actually acting as natural fire breaks. So you'll see a fire going through the valley, and all of a sudden when it hits a vineyard, the vineyard's stopping the fire. So in fact, vineyards are not being destroyed. They're actually saving lives, they're saving structures, and really part of the fire maintenance and containment solution here.
And we know that tourism and the wine industry really are the economic drivers of this area. How might these fires affect that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest thing I can say out there is, folks, don't cancel your reservations. Please still come to Sonoma County, come to Napa Valley. We need you now more than ever. Buy our wines, support our industry. They're absolutely going to be the drivers that help us rebuild our communities. So we need you now.
CHRİS, thanks very much, and good luck to you and everyone else out there. And John, I should also mention, I talked to a fire chief from a fire department outside of here. We've got people from 9 different states here at the staging grounds to battle the fire. And he says if the winds don't kick back up, they expect those containment numbers to jump in the next 24 hours. Back to you.
Robert Gray, Fox Business, some good advice there. Thank you.
President Trump taking another hit at Obamacare, announcing he is scrapping federal subsidies to insurance companies that participate in Obamacare exchanges. The president tweeting, "Obamacare is a broken mess. Piece by piece, we will now begin the process of giving America the great health care it deserves." Democratic leaders blasting the move, saying, quote, "Sadly, instead of working to lower health care costs or health costs for Americans, it seems President Trump will single-handedly hike Americans' health premiums. It is a spiteful act of vast, pointless sabotage leveled at working families as the middle class in every corner of America. Patrick Griffin is a former media consultant to 4 Republican presidential campaigns, and Liz Smith is a former deputy campaign manager for Martin O'Malley. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Patrick, from that quote, it sounds like they love what's going on. Chuck and Nancy are right on board. They think it's fantastic. Was that your interpretation there?
Yeah, Chuck and Nancy better get someone to give them an electoral map from the 2016 campaign, because it seems their idea here is that only the coastal elite in this country represent working Americans. The bottom line here is quality access and affordability, which is what the Affordable Care Act was supposed to deliver to working class Americans, is in fact exactly what it hasn't done. So I think yesterday's announcement by the president, his executive order, was a very good first step at single-handedly beginning to dismantle Obamacare administratively. We'll see what happens, but the president had a very interesting line, Melissa, this morning in his speech when he said some Republicans forget what they campaigned on. I think this is a very important issue for him. He needs a win on the board, and this is a good way to do it.
So, Liz, how do you, if you don't want to dismantle Obamacare and you want to fix it, it seems like the only way to do that is by giving more of our audience's money, more taxpayer dollars, more government funds to the insurance companies. Is there another way to fix it besides giving them more money?
Sure. Look, there are, I think, a number of proposals out there.
Like what?
For letting Medicare and Medicaid negotiate for lower drug prices, lowering the entry age for Medicare, introducing more competition into healthcare markets with a public option.
Wait, what does that mean? More competition with the public option?
Yes.
What do those words mean?
When you put in a government option to compete. For instance, in some markets right now, and some we're seeing that there's only like one employer. And I will tell you this, and I'm going to agree with you, that this law is not perfect, and that is not an ideal situation.
But if the government's in the healthcare business, I mean, that's taxpayer dollars. I mean, all the things that you're talking about is taking more money from taxpayers and giving it to insurance companies.
But Melissa, the government has been in the healthcare business for decades.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the solution is more money from the government.
Well, look, we are going to pay for it one way or another.
So yes.
Well, how about this? You know what? If you kick millions of people off the healthcare rolls, who do you think is going to pay for it? We're going to pay for it when people go to the emergency room.
So no matter what,
healthy
people are going to pay for sick people, and that's the bottom line. No matter what is what she's saying, right?
What I'm saying is that no matter what, healthcare costs money, and we're going to pay for it one way or the other. So why don't we pay for it on the front end rather than the back end?
Let me ask you, isn't the problem with the fact that there isn't enough money in the system right now, and she's saying one way or the other, everybody's got to kick in more in order to get this done? The problem is maybe that we're trying to force people to buy health insurance that they don't want and they don't need. I mean, is that even moral to force people to buy things that they don't want and spend their money where they don't want to do it?
Well, of course it is. It's ridiculous. The thing that's fascinating about Chuck and Nancy is that they seem to not understand that they set the house on fire, poured gasoline on it. The house is burning down, and they continue to suggest that the president is trying to fix it as a bad thing. The definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing and expecting a different outcome. When the government gets in the business of trying to decide winners and losers, mandate a one-size-fits-all big government solution from the concrete canyons of Washington to states around the country, it's a bad idea. Look, it's failed again and again, Melissa. Hasn't worked now. The Democrats need to understand we need to try something different. You cannot defend soaring premiums, less coverage, and less access when they claimed they were going to fix that with Obamacare.
In the first half of the year, the 5 major healthcare companies had profits of more than $10 billion. So they're doing fine. I know they don't need a bailout. I'm not sure we solved it, but we tried. Guys, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And it was a rollicking good try, too.
For a Friday, especially.
That's right.
There you go.
You're on top of your game. For most of Puerto Rico, the lights are still out. President Trump faced backlash after his tweet about withdrawing federal aid. He now appears to be changing his tone. Our next guest, a former NFL star, talks about his big plans to help that island.